G'day expats and welcome to another episode of Expat Chat, episode 132 today. And today, as always, joined by my brother from another mother. That's a very dad joke sort of thing, isn't it? But anyway, Mr. James Ridley is the Managing Director for the Asia Pacific region and Head of the Australian office. G'day, James.
G'day, Brett, and as always, those that are joining us on YouTube, that are watching us live, that can see us on the left-hand side, Brett Evans, the Managing Director and Founding Director of Atlas Wealth Group, who is in Europe, Middle East, Africa, is currently in Dubai at the moment. Where will he be in the next few years? We'll see. But how are you, mate? You've still got a jumper on, so it's obviously freezing over there.
Mate, 11 degrees on the way to work this morning. It's crispy.
Jeez.
Yeah, and it's also it's a damp cold too. There's a lot of moisture in the air, so it's not a crisp cold. It's like a damp cold. Really gets in your bones. So,
yeah.
But mate, no rain. It's weird. Now this is our rainy season. Normally this time of year, we've already had 2 or 3 big storms go through, and she's slim pickings at the moment. So Mother Nature's just thrown us a curveball. Maybe she shot all her bullets in April last year, and no more bullets to fire. But we'll see what transpires over the coming months. Get a bit of admin out of the way. All the information that James and I are going to share with you, lovely folks, should be treated as information and educational purposes only. Please do not construe this as personal advice. If you do need personal advice, reach out to a specialist like Atlas. And mate, today we're going to talk about a unique subset of what our clients face, and that's Sharia law, which clients in the GCC region, any sort of country that has Islamic foundations behind it, has to contend with this. And I'm noticing there's a lot of new Aussies hitting this region. Fantastic. Salam, g'day, welcome. But you need to understand, when it comes to structuring your finances, the complications that go along with that. So if you're in the US, maybe jump on to the next episode. If you're in Europe, some people in Europe might have to face this, but this is really speaking to a lot of folks in the Middle East region, because it is a complicating factor. We do have clients that face this through death when they unfortunately pass away in the region. We've had them before, and it does get complicated. So to sort of give everyone a lowdown, the 101 of Sharia law, unlike in common law jurisdictions like Australia and the UK and the United States, in the Middle East, we have Sharia law, which is a law based on Islamic foundations. And you don't have to be a practicing Muslim to be affected by Sharia law. And when I say that, I'm more referring to an Australian citizen, Christian, Catholic, Buddhist, atheist, doesn't matter what you are in this country. If you are living in the Middle East, you, not while you're living, but when you're dead, that's when it affects a lot of clients. And by that I mean the local courts will apply Sharia law to your situation. And this is where things get a bit complicated, because under Sharia law, your assets don't automatically go to your surviving partner, spouse, or close family member. The bulk of those assets go to your oldest male living relative. So that can be quite an awkward conversation. If your husband dies and it goes to his brother or his father, who you don't get along with. We've had that before. So that gets complicated. So one of the reasons, easiest ways to manage this situation is twofold. A, keep the majority of assets outside of the Middle East. Obviously, one of the reasons why we do recommend repatriating assets back to Australia is to avoid currency risk and geopolitical risk, but also legislative risk is a big one. So by that I mean, if you've only got a modicum of assets in the Middle East and they're all parked everywhere else around the world, and you pass away in the Middle East, then you only have to contend with Sharia law on those smaller base of assets. It doesn't extend outside that country. Those other countries where those assets are housed, like Australia, Australian law will apply accordingly there. So that's the most important number one. Obviously, what happens is when you are, and I'm not being sexist here, but just the way that the demographics tend to work out, usually the husband gets the job and sponsors the wife to live here. Now, if the husband passes away, then essentially the bank account's in the husband's name and the wife might have a supplementary. The concept of a joint account doesn't exist in the UAE especially. So the wife or the partner will be a supplementary on the husband's account. If the husband passes away, then that account is frozen while the local courts go through the process of what would be the local equivalent to probate back in Australia. The complicating factor about that is what does the wife live on, with kids especially, if the accounts are frozen. So it's important to have an account in the wife's name as well when you're alive, do this all when you're alive, because by doing it that way, it means you can have a safety net or a buffer of cash sitting outside of the main bank account that you might use for your salary transfers and those things. So if the husband does pass away, the wife can still access cash. Second thing you need to do is have a local will. Now, there's a lot of grey space in this area with respect to wills, especially in the UAE. There's a couple of different versions. There's the Dubai government indicated that Dubai courts will recognise an Australian will if the citizen is an Australian. Now, that's great. Haven't had any clients had to go through that. So I can't speak from experience, which is normally how we like to relay information to expats, is based on these 3 cases that we've been involved in. This is what happens. We haven't had a client go through that process because luckily they've been set up correctly. But the other ways you can have it, you can have what's called a DIFC will. DIFC will, which is where we're located, the Dubai International Financial Centre, is a common law jurisdiction, and you can get a common law will. And the DIFC courts are the ones that manage that process. Not a cheap exercise at all, but it's a will that provides a bit more certainty than not having a will at all, or hoping that a Dubai court does recognise your Australian will. Third option is down at the expat courts, the ADJD, the Abu Dhabi Judicial Department. So you can actually have guardianship wills and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot cheaper than the DIFC will, but because Abu Dhabi is the capital of the UAE, they have more of a federal view on where their wills are applicable. So there's different reasons why you would use a DIFC will versus an ADJ will, but I think you can see that the complicating factors that are there. You know, if you don't have the right paperwork set up and structured, then as well as grieving for your loss, you're going to have to go through a lot of hoops to get back what is rightfully yours, unless you want some of those funds to go to a relative who may or may not be entitled to those funds. So if you hate your brother-in-law, the last thing you want is your money to go to him. So it's something that I like to address from time to time, because the amount of new Aussies I meet coming to the region who don't even know what Sharia law is, it's a bit scary because it can go sideways pretty quickly. But if you do things right and just set things up right from the start, then it shouldn't be a consideration. At the end of the day, the way that you do manage the situation is not keeping a lot of assets in the Middle East.
Yep. Gosh, mate, there's a lot there to take on there, especially, wills in general. I know often a lot of Australian expats, even when it comes to just their own wills back in Australia, Australian assets must have a will. If you've got property, you've got, say, shares, you've got superannuation, which is usually governed by those binding death benefit nominations. Often these things are forgotten about, but they're really important, especially if we have kids, especially if we have young kids. It's really hard trying to nominate guardians and who's going to take on guardianship until the kids are 25, all these sort of things. But it is often forgotten about. So you do want to make sure you often are working with a specialist that has worked with Australian expats living and working overseas, especially if you have those assets back in Australia, because we've seen some nasty cases when even, I'd say, an expat's receive an inheritance because their parents have passed away, but they haven't also had that conversation with their parents, and then that means that CGT event, K3's kicked in, and it hasn't made the distribution of assets fair and equitable between, say, 2 or 3 siblings because the parent has passed away. So not only obviously taking care of ourselves and making sure we've got an up-to-date estate plan in place, and obviously if we have assets in a foreign country, you do need to do some research. And as Brett said, especially within the Middle East and Sharia law, getting the right things in place. But not only that, it does extend to your other family members. So if your parents haven't done a will and you're staying overseas for the next 10, 15 years and they're getting it on and they might pass away in that time frame, then you need to have a conversation with have they set up their will to encompass the fact that you're a non-resident, and it could create a situation where a distribution of assets could be really unfair because someone has to pay a lot more tax. So it's an awkward conversation, absolutely, to have with parents, but I suppose when you think about a will, an estate plan, it's often sometimes referred to as the last love letter.
That's good. I've never heard that before. It's quite a good way to call it,
yeah. Well, remember, by doing a will and doing good estate planning, you are laying out the framework and the roadmap for difficult decisions in the future that they don't have to make because you've made them today. And that's really important.
Yeah.
It means, great, they don't have to make difficult decisions. You've made them today because, based on how you love them and what you want to happen with those assets and to provide for the family. So that's why, by some of the solicitors, it gets called your last love letter. It's strange, but it is. It's the same with within the estate plan, the letter of wishes, those sort of things. So if you haven't given any thought and you need a contact or anyone that just to, I suppose, review your old will or anything like that, reach out. We've got some great experts that can help around that one. And not only in Australia, but obviously overseas, UK, the US, Middle East, there's a lot of professionals around there.
Look, exactly. I mean, this is a skill set under its own thing based on jurisdiction and the eccentricities of those areas. So we know them a lot. We understand them a lot, but we don't even get involved in the writing of a mirror will or whatever that looks like, especially locally in this region, because it's so complicated. And there's so many moving parts and the rules are changing so quickly. It's amazing how the government just makes an edict, off a go, bang, there, that's changing coming through. But is it following through to the courts? You need to have experienced people who are sitting in the courts on a daily basis, seeing that experience. But so there are ways you can mitigate the fallout. Not having a lot of assets in the country is one of them. Repatriating those assets back to a jurisdiction like and trust, like Australia, or if you do, say, even own property in the UAE, or especially in Dubai anyway, you'll need to have a DIFC will. That's by law. If you want to have a will, you can't have another will for your Dubai property, so you'll have to have a DIFC will. But if you don't own any Dubai property, then you can use ADJD. So there's a lot of options there available, but just please do one. One of our clients I've been talking to for 3 or 4 years about got it done last month, and she said it was the best experience ever now that she doesn't have to worry about it.
Yep. Absolutely. It is. It's one of these things we don't often think about, but it's really important if something goes wrong, and things do go wrong. Absolutely.
They do.
So they absolutely do. We've seen clients that have obviously randomly passed away, fit and healthy, and they had the right will, they had the right beneficiary details set up, whether it's on their superannuation, pension, or within different structures. And so the transfer of assets was smooth. But when you don't have something in place and then it goes obviously to the state and the state's got to work it out, that can be drawn out, 10, I don't want to say a very long time, but it can be over a year before something's solved. It's very expensive as well. The state doesn't mind charging a lot of fees for that, eating up a lot of legal fees. And if you're in a situation where you are relying on, say, your spouse for income, well, if you don't have savings to help you for the next 12 months, then you're going to be at a significant financial loss and distress. So it's really, really important that you lay the pillars with that will to make sure you're taken care of in the future.
I'd say it's more important than even starting to save, especially in the Middle East region. It's pointless having all these savings if they're going to go to someone else who you don't want it to go to. So if you're building a house, you lay a foundation. If you're building a financial wealth plan, you need to make sure that the wealth plan is stable in the good and the bad times. And the way you can not guarantee it, but improve the odds is certainly having a correct will.
Absolutely, mate. Protecting your assets, protecting your loved ones, something goes wrong. We're harping on about it because we've seen obviously worst case scenarios.
We sit at the coal seat.
Exactly right. So, and I'd hate for my clients, any of them, to go through an awful experience, division of assets, those sort of things, when a will's not in place and you have to rely on the state, because it is awful. It's an awful experience dealing with the state. If there's any government employees listening in, I'm sorry, but it really is. It drags on it. It's useless, to be honest. It's a shit experience.
Yeah, it is. But mate, I think we'll leave it there. It's a bit of a morbid topic, but I just want to clear the air for 2025 and get the housekeeping out of the way. So, folks, if you're in the Middle East region or any country that has Sharia law implications, do the right thing. Readjust, restructure your assets and finances, get the proper paperwork in place, and not worried about it again.
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't say it better myself. In the meantime, guys, thanks for tuning in for another episode. Look forward to bringing you more and see you on the next episode. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, James. See you, mate.